going to get started. So thanks everyone for joining us today. Today we're running the first of two parts of this webinar on designing an effective SEO experimentation program for greater ROI, greater return on investment. This is part one, so we're talking about setting the foundation for SEO experimentation success. And I'm Sam Renza. I'll tell you a bit more about myself in a minute. But first of all, this is all about setting up an effective SEO experimentation program. What does that mean? And the kind of shortest definition of that we've come up with is a structured approach to hypothesis-based testing for the organic search channel. And breaking that down, first of all, it's a structured approach. That means there's a plan from the beginning. We've got clearly set goals, objectively defined expectations on how much testing we can do, and alignment on what the priorities of the testing is. And this is the kind of areas of the kind of thing we're going to talk a lot about today, and how to set up a well-structured program. The fact it's hypothesis-based testing means there's strong SEO reasoning for how the change that is being tested will impact organic traffic. That generally means it will either impact rankings, click-through rate, or the set of keywords that a given page will rank for. Having a strong hypothesis makes it easier to prioritize the tests that have the best chance of having a strong impact on traffic, rather than a more sporadic approach. It also requires that the methodology for the testing is robust so that those hypotheses are objectively able to be tested and that any external factors involved are controlled for. And we're talking about SEO experimentation programs today, and in general, which means we're talking about organic traffic as being measured. We do generally and would encourage everyone to monitor other metrics such as Search Console, rankings or click-through rate data to add explanatory power, and potentially conversion metrics. We use something called full funnel testing for that to ensure organic traffic isn't coming at the expense of overall revenue or anything else that's important to the business. So a bit about me and my background. I am a senior consultant and the lead onboarding specialist at SearchPilot, which means I work with brands like these and more beyond that to set up their experimentation programs for that sustained success. I've been doing it for about 5 years, designing experimentation programs, figuring out how to make them work well. And within SearchPilot's professional services team, we've matured a lot in our approach over that kind of time span. We've seen the value in taking that structured approach, and our customers have really been on board with that as well. Whereas in the early days, it was a bit more sporadic. It was a bit more, let's test some things, see what works, without that longer term view necessarily behind it. Prior to specializing in the SEO A/B testing side of things, I was a technical SEO and analytics consultant. And yeah, I've been in the industry for a total of around 9 years. A lot of our customers come to us with a desire to create a culture of experimentation program, or with an existing culture across their company, but they want to expand that from their UX, product, ad teams into SEO, which is a bit later generally in getting into the testing side of things. And we believe the best way to create that culture of experimentation is to run a program that has clearly defined goals and keep ourselves and everyone involved accountable to those goals. So the focus today is on that exactly, how to set strategic goals and benchmarks of success, and how to report on your results and champion your program. So in basic terms, how to know you're doing the right things and how to convince other people of that. We've got another session in 3 weeks' time, which is on how to create strong hypotheses and how to analyze test results, which is more the hands-on on what makes great individual tests and how to turn individual tests into a holistic program. So getting into how we set goals for an experimentation program. As with all things, goals need to be achievable but ambitious. We need to be doing the maximum that we can within the constraints that we have. And a quick note on methodology before we get into how we set goals. I think it's going to be useful to explain a little bit more about how we run SEO experiments at Search Pilot. This is how we do things, but any SEO experimentation program, whether it's with us or on your own, will have similar underpinnings behind how the testing works. First of all, we decide on which pages we want to run a test on, and the Search Pilot platform analyzes traffic data, organic traffic data, to divide pages into control and variant groups that are statistically similar. This is different from traditional CRO testing that some people might be more familiar with, in which each page has an A and a B version, and each user comes to the website could be bucketed into either the A group or the B group. And then that user will always be an A for that test or always be a B for that test, and see that version of every page within the test. For SEO testing, the main user we're trying to impact is Googlebot, and then by impacting Googlebot, that will then bring more traffic via people accessing the site via Google. We need to know which version of the page Googlebot has seen. And then for that reason, within each test, each page is either always a control or always a variant. And then we compare the results by looking at those pages' performance against each other. We deploy the change to the variant group of pages, which in this chart is kind of at this level. And we compare that against a forecast. The forecast takes into account the performance of the control group. And that means because we have a statistically similar control group and we're forecasting based on that, any difference between the variant and the forecast can be attributed to the change we made rather than any external factors like seasonality or algorithm updates. And then we also apply statistical analysis on top of that. So this chart is showing the cumulative difference between the two buckets. And we apply statistical methods to validate that the impact we're measuring isn't due to any sort of random noise or external factors, and that it is statistically significant. The previous slides, that's all talking about an individual test and how we run those, but we're talking about an experimentation program. So organizations who are effective in using SEO testing to improve their performance, they understand that the individual tests are not what's important. It's the entire testing program that's effective. An individual test might last a few weeks, but we will always measure success over year-long or even longer timescales. And individual test results are unpredictable. Pinning all of our hopes on an individual test is not a good way to measure success. It's the incremental insights and the uplift over multiple tests over the course of months or years that deliver the return on investment that we and our customers need to see. And we focus then on what we can control rather than relying on the results of individual tests. So what do people want to get out of an experimentation program? What are they trying to achieve? Some SEO teams we work with are driven primarily by traffic goals, and that's what they're measured against, and they want to see growth or they want to see performance against competitors there. Others are measured on revenue, so they tie in their bottom line money numbers into that. And then some others, well, obviously that stuff is important. Sessions revenue is always going to be important, but they're also interested in the learnings they can gain from the experimentation program to then they can apply that to their broader strategy. They might have multiple domains or multiple markets they operate in, and the learnings from the testing program in one place can be applied across a wider context. So going back to what can we control when we're looking to measure success? Broadly, there's three things: the amount of testing you can do, how strong your test hypotheses are, and how well you can analyze test results. Bear with me. So first of all, quantity of tests. What is a reasonable number to set for that? And taking into account quantity of tests and the other metrics, we end up with two main metrics that we can track: the number of tests we can run and what proportion of those tests end up as winners. So how many tests can we run? What's a reasonable how do we work that out? Generally, we will break, or the way Search Pilot works is we'll break a website down into templated site sections within which we can run one test at a time. And a site section generally needs to be a single template across a whole group of pages. It needs to be upwards of 100 URLs, ideally much more than that, and a minimum of 1,000 organic sessions per day across those pages, net across all of them. If we're well above those levels, we can subdivide a template into multiple site sections. If after that subdividing, we're still meeting the criteria laid out here. So to take a hypothetical example, if you had an e-commerce website you were going to run an experimentation program on, you might be able to subdivide based on those traffic and page volume criteria into this kind of breakdown. So you've got one category landing page at the top level, 3 individual product listing pages below that, and site sections across product listing pages, that is, 2 site sections across the product details pages, and then you might also have a content and resources section, which is templated enough and has enough pages to test on as well. So that hypothetical would give us a total of 7 site sections across the entire website that we can test on at any one time. And then the other factor that comes into that is we know how many tests we can run at once, but how long does a test take? And this can definitely vary. Unlike traditional CRO testing, we don't have to predefine a test duration. We can make informed decisions based on how we see tests progress. So the example in this screenshot here, this is an example of a really strong positive result. You can see that from the gap between the forecast and the actual in the top chart. And then in the bottom chart, the confidence interval, so the shaded area, is way in the positive. And there's no doubt that that it could be a negative result at all. So we don't need to leave this running very long. This was a real test that was ended after 2 weeks because we knew at that point we had a significant positive result. That tends to happen if, like this, there's a really strong impact, or if a section has a lot of traffic and the modeling is really strong. That means we can be really sensitive and detect those impacts earlier than otherwise. On the other hand, some tests might take a lot longer. This one here was 6 or 7 weeks, and that's often because traffic levels might be lower, or it's a more subtle impact that we're measuring. Yeah, it can take a bit longer to reach that statistical significance. In our experience, most tests will run somewhere within this range between 2 and 6 or 7 weeks, and the average duration is around 3 weeks. We can apply a bit more insight into how long tests should run for by using Googlebot crawl data as well. And we can monitor how long it's taken for Google to crawl a significant proportion of the pages within a test, at which point we know any impact will start to show in the traffic data after that point. We've got a post on our website by our CEO, Will Critchlow, who wrote about this and the other ways that we use Googlebot crawl data within SEO testing, which I'd recommend anyone check that out. We'll share the slides with the link afterwards. All of this taken together means we generally plan for each test to take 1 month from launch to the site section being available for the next test. And a key thing to mention here is that we always leave a cooldown window after we end a test in a given section. That's to ensure that the state of the pages has been re-crawled and re-indexed by Google before we then launch the next test. And that's generally around 1 to 2 weeks, but we can inform that based on the Googlebot data as with the test duration. So this hypothetical would set the capacity at one test per each of those 7 site sections per month. After that average of 3 weeks plus the 1 week cooldown window. And then for our e-commerce example website with 7 site sections, that means we can aim for 7 tests per month, 21 tests per quarter, 84 tests if we multiply that out across the year. In my experience, that's quite a high cadence in this hypothetical example. When we talk to in-house teams who are running their own experimentation programs, it's often they're running kind of single figure quantities of tests across a quarter, kind of a handful of tests, and they often don't have the ability to run multiple tests in parallel. But then we also work with some companies using Search Pilot who are running upwards of 180 tests per year, so kind of double this level or more. And in reality, it's not going to play out as neatly as that because we can end tests optimally based on the outcome. It normally ends up looking something more like this. Some tests will be ended after 2 weeks. Some tests will take 5 or 6 weeks to run. That has the nice side effect that it staggers the end of each test. So we're not just running all the tests for 3 weeks, end them all, move on to the next one. It doesn't, it means it doesn't stack up all that building work and then all the analysis work afterwards. It staggers it out nicely. Other things to bear in mind here are you might not just be limited by the number of site sections or the amount of traffic on your website. Other key factors are the capacity to build tests, whether that's an engineering team or using a tool like Search Pilot, and having a strong backlog of test hypotheses. So it's all very well and good saying, okay, we can run 10 tests a month, 15 tests a month. But if you don't have the strong hypotheses to test and you don't have the resources to build those tests, that's not a realistic goal. So aligning on the realistic goal takes into account all of those factors. And then we end up with something like this. This is how we track test cadence generally with our customers. We have that target number of builds or target number of tests rolled out against how many we've actually done in that time. Quick aside to mention is referring earlier to tests reaching statistical significance and when to end them. It's not always the best policy to wait for statistical significance. If a test is in the top right of this chart, so it's an easy test to make, easy change to make, a cheap change to make, and there's a strong SEO hypothesis behind it, it might be you just want to see the balance of probabilities. You want to see that it's more likely to be positive than negative. And in that case, you can move quicker and end things earlier than you might have otherwise. The next factor that's in our control is how good our test hypotheses can be. And this is something we're going to come onto a lot more in the next session in 3 weeks' time. That's going to be all about how we can have strong SEO test hypotheses and then how we can leverage that into a holistic SEO testing program. The general idea is that the stronger your hypotheses are, the more likely that the things you're testing are going to have a positive impact on performance. And then the last factor is how good your test analysis can be. And that comes back to what your minimum detectable uplift is. That impacts the proportion of tests that are going to be positive. It also impacts how quickly you might be able to end a test if it is positive or negative based on your analysis. The minimum detectable uplift is the smallest positive or negative impact that your measurement tools are able to detect with statistical confidence. It varies between site sections based on their traffic levels and the quality of the models we're able to create. It's the thing that factors in when we're deciding how many tests we expect to be positive. This screenshot here is from some work our data science team have recently done, improving the sensitivity of our models. So these 3 images are all from the same test, and nothing has changed about the middle line, which is like the impact, but the confidence intervals are narrower, and that's from our newer analysis methods basically means we can be a lot more sensitive, a lot more certain about the uplifts. And in the sample data set that this was looking at, we went from 13% of tests in that sample having a statistically significant positive result to 29%. So it over doubled the sensitivity in that sample of tests. And more generally, we've improved our models, and we have, in my opinion, been running much better experimentation programs with all of the previous factors mentioned. We've managed to increase our win rate, and this is across all of Search Pilot customers. From it was around 10% in 2021, it's over 20% now. And comparing that to the CRO industry, which is a lot more established, there's a lot more data out there on win rates in CRO. It's around 12 to 15, maybe 20% if you're lucky, from these like public statements from Optimising and from Ronnie Kahavi, who has run testing at some big companies. Yeah, it's on par with what we're looking at from our SEO testing. Between 10 and 20% is a reasonable level. So going back to what we can control, we set goals around cadence and try and maximize the number of tests we can roll out. And then we monitor win rate to make sure we're hitting a good level with that compared to industry benchmarks. So that's how we set goals. Moving on next to how we report success, or how I recommend that you, for your SEO experimentation program, should report success. So we mentioned these two charts a second ago. These things should be reviewed weekly. This is the thing that we bring up in all of our weekly calls of like, are we on track for the number of tests? How is our win rate looking over the last few months? And if both of those charts look like they did on the previous slide, things are probably going well, and the experimentation program is probably set up for success. But we see these as more the like the lead measures. So they're the things we can impact, that if we hit both of those, we believe we'll end up with a successful program. It doesn't necessarily mean that the outcomes we're looking for are going to be hit as a result of that. So in terms of reporting, we definitely recommend reporting every test result in a report such as this one. What we include here is generally the result and the hypothesis behind it, and then what we learn off the back of that. So even if it was an inconclusive or a negative test, there's always learnings to be had that can inform future tests. But then we can also look at the bottom line, so the return on investment for any given test. And a test result, as it's reported by Search Pilot, will always give a range of impacts based on that confidence interval. So for example, let's say we had a test that gave a range from 7 to 12% impact on traffic. And then we'll also be able to report the monthly traffic, monthly sessions impact by taking those percentages and applying them to the site section as a whole from before the test. So here we'd have that 7 to 12% impact, which translates to 8 to 14,000 or so monthly sessions impact, which is like a great number to have. We always have to remember, if it's a subdivided site section, like in our e-commerce example from earlier with the PLPs, you can extrapolate that across the 3 sections within that template, assuming that it's a hypothesis that applies to all of those pages. So in this case, that takes it from 8 to 14,000 up to 25 to 43,000. And then revenue is the key thing. So I mentioned earlier, traffic is great, but revenue is generally what leadership teams will want to hear about. And if we already know our average value per session, or we can work that out somehow, we can then apply the traffic numbers to that value per session to turn that into the monthly organic revenue impact of an individual test. Just because we have that monthly number of 67 to 113,000 in this example, it doesn't necessarily translate to 12 times that for the year, or it's going to be that yearly figure that's just going to go on forever. As anyone who works in SEO knows, nothing is permanent. Competitors are busy playing catch up. Algorithm updates happen. There's so many other factors outside of our control that can change that mean that an individual test result isn't necessarily valid over the long term. So generally, we'll assume an SEO test will have a longevity of around 6 months. Some will be longer, some will be shorter, and always recommend to apply your SEO knowledge of what that particular change was and what the competitive space looks like to judge it on a case-by-case basis. We definitely would recommend having some sort of assumed duration of impact that a result is valid for. And yeah, 6 months tends to be a good standard figure for that. So that takes the individual test result that originally was just 7 to 12%. We can turn that into a kind of lifetime impact of that test of between, in this case, $400,000 and nearly $700,000. And that's just one test. If we're still in that e-commerce example where we're running 84 tests per year, and if we hit a standard kind of 15% win rate, that translates to around 13 positive tests over the course of the year. Assuming every test is similar to the example I just showed with a revenue impact of around $500,000, that means the testing program as a whole, with the same assumptions, would be worth $6.5 million incremental dollars of revenue per year if we hit all those metrics. It's not just those positive results with the big revenue numbers that are valuable. We always recommend testing changes that you might have rolled out anyway that maybe seem like no-brainers. We see surprising results all the time from things that the SEO team are saying, let's just publish this. If we say, no, let's test this, they're not always positive and sometimes they're negative. And we talk about rescued sessions in that context where if it's a change that would have been rolled out if there wasn't a testing program, we can attribute the value of that to the testing program. So going back to the 3 ways you might measure an experimentation program, if a team's benchmarked against traffic goals, the uplift numbers applied across all tests can contribute to that goal. So if you have a percentage traffic impact or a number of additional sessions yearly impact, you can definitely take the individual test results, extrapolate them out over the year, and calculate that for your tests. Same with revenue, it's like in the example I've just shown. You can definitely apply the numbers from that to your goals if you're looking over kind of the yearly company-wide goals. For the learning side of things, the best way to present that is generally kind of quarterly headline summary decks potentially to present to leadership, outlining the key learnings that have been gained from testing, what tests have been run, what the results have been, how that's impacted the broader SEO strategy, because that's what we're trying to do here, as well as the direct impact of the tests. It's the broader learnings that impact strategy. So to summarize, it's important to set achievable but ambitious goals, measure what you can control and benchmark against that, and then report in the end on revenue, but also on the learnings from the experimentation program. There's more resources on this QR code, and you can find it through the searchpilot.com website. We've got a white paper out, which is on the same topic as this, so realizing the value of a good experimentation program. And then we've also got a bi-weekly case study that gets emailed out to our mailing list, which tells you about the actual results we've seen from our SEO A/B tests. So you can sign up through that same QR code to receive that in your inbox every 2 weeks. Thank you all for listening. We've got some time for questions if people have any. And again, there's a QR code. I'll leave that up on the screen so people can grab that if they want to find out more. I can see a question about forecasting. So how do you approach forecasting? From anonymous attendee. So I imagine this is in reference to the kind of traffic forecasting for individual tests. That is, we have our proprietary neural network engine that our data scientists have built. That takes so originally we used Google's causal impact model, and it uses some similar underpinnings to that, but we've improved upon it. So we've got some objective numbers on that, how we can outperform that in terms of the sensitivity to differences between the control and variant groups. We've got articles on our website about that. But yeah, it's our own proprietary forecasting tools based on a neural network. So it's a machine learning based system that tries to model what would have happened if the test hadn't taken place. Does anyone else feel free to add more questions to the chat? I'm happy to hang around for a little bit longer if people have questions. Another question. How do you make sure you achieve an equal split? So that comes back to the bucketing. So before we launch a test, we take our site section, so our group of pages, and we run analysis over. So we take the analytics data for organic traffic to every page within the site section. And again, we have an algorithmic approach, so it analyzes the traffic data within that, and it takes into account a few metrics, so the kind of overall traffic levels, the pattern of traffic over kind of the weekly and longer cadence within that, and just tries to match up the two groups of pages so that there's minimal difference between them. There's always going to be some difference, like we're dealing with real world traffic, real world websites. So any difference there is after that bucketing process, that's where the forecasting kind of fills those gaps and makes sure, we're measuring the true difference between the two groups as a result of the test. What would be an example of a test to run? So any SEO change that has an impact on a page level would make a great test to run. So we, across the all of our different customers, run a really wide range of tests. It can be simple stuff like changes to title tags, as long as it's a templated change across the set of pages. So changes to what the order that words appear in a title tag, for example, or adding extra keywords to title tags. Could be meta descriptions, it could be on-page content, could be layout changes, could be internal linking, it could be schema. There's kind of anything that affects SEO on a page-by-page level can make an SEO test. Hopefully that answers your question. Give everyone a few more minutes to ask questions if they have them. And then, also just to mention my email address on the screen. So if people have questions they think of later or don't want to put in the chat, you can email me, and I'll try and get back to you. But it seems like questions are dried up. So yeah, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for your time. Oh, as I say that, another question's come in. How many pages do you use in a test? So the sample size. Again, that varies. It varies a lot depending on the type of website. We have some, for example, e-commerce or listings or travel, where there's tens of thousands of pages within a site section. If it's like a blog or something like that, it'll be fewer. It might be in the hundreds, but the minimum would be 1 to 200 pages within the same template. And then the key other factor is traffic. So you need at least 1,000 organic sessions per day across that group of pages, whether that's 100 or 10,000 pages. So yeah, we've got the next webinar coming up with me again in 3 weeks' time on the 4th of June. There's a register link here, and you can find the details on our socials as well. But yeah, thank you everyone, and hopefully see you on the 4th of June.